Hello, my name is Carly. Some of you might recognize me from the front office at Falcone Institute. We want to welcome you all to the second session of our Awareness and Education series. We are so excited to have you. I'm joined today by Madeline Falcone and Sierra Still. Madeline is our owner and founder, and she's also a licensed marriage and family therapist. And Sierra Still is our speech language therapist, and she joined the team in April of 2022. Today, Madeline, Sierra, and I will be discussing the various social media platforms that you may be hearing cycle through your child's everyday life, as well as the effects on different aspects of child and adolescent development. Social media is incredibly important and prevalent in today's society, more so than I think we'd like to acknowledge. Due to the exponential growth in this specific media consumption, we thought it important to look at the different platforms and the influences that they hold. Before we dive in, I'd like to preface today's discussion by saying that there are so many layers to social media usage and how it can affect a child's development. We're going to do our best to be concise, but the information that we will be discussing today will only be scratching the surface. So if you're interested in learning more, we suggest maybe going to the different platforms, community guideline pages, and researching some of the things we discussed today on your own as well. With that said, I'd also like to remind everyone that we will follow today's discussion with a Q&A. So if you have any questions as we continue, feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will address those at the end. So to start off, I wanted to look at the prevalence of each major social media platform and how the usage has changed over the last 7 years for teens ranging from 13 to 17. You should be able to see a graph on your screen now. As we can see, Instagram and Snapchat have skyrocketed over the last few years. YouTube and TikTok were not surveyed initially, but they are now the two highest platforms being utilized in 2022 by teens, with YouTube clearly taking the cake. Although Twitter is experiencing a downward trend in usage among teens, it's a platform that we will be talking about today due to the heightened risk that it poses. Let's start with YouTube as our most used platform among teens. We don't usually think of YouTube as a social media platform, given that it's not really used to connect with peers. However, it still seems to be a site that is used heavily among teens. And from personal experience, I know that it's also used heavily among kids or anyone under the age of 13 as well. Sierra, will you tell us a little bit about what YouTube is being used for?
Sure. So YouTube is a video sharing site, and it's predominantly used to consume a variety of different media, whether that's music videos, how-to videos, infant learning videos, you name it, it's on YouTube.
Perfect. And can you both elaborate on what the effects of this media consumption at such a young age has on social media development, such as social pragmatics and social awareness? I mean, we see a lot of young kids these days using the platforms. For me, I would think that teenagers and young adults would be using the platform, but when I looked into who uses the platform the most, the top 3 YouTube personnel are all aimed towards young kids. So can you touch on how using these platforms at such a young age can affect, like I said, social development, such as social pragmatics and social emotional awareness?
Do you want Sarah? You want me? Okay. I think that initially we have to understand what awareness is. Awareness is really recognizing, noticing what they're feeling, what their attitudes are, what is happening in what they're observing. So if you take a young child who is, 1 year old, and they are interacting, or they think they're interacting with this screen because they're interactive, they're not really experiencing true pragmatics. All right, they're experiencing a simulation of a pragmatic, because it's very different being in person and experiencing that relationship, that energetic field, versus watching it on a screen. So that the issue of when we're looking at body-mind connection, which I mentioned in our initial words to the nerves presentation, that reality doesn't doesn't really happen. There isn't a real connection with body mind. And so that it doesn't relate to their actions or their feelings or their behaviors, understanding the tone of the voice, the inflection, and so forth. Our kids sometimes do not then, they don't have really the ability to reflect on their own behaviors. Or how their own self is being presented. And this goes across the board. So I'm not just talking about little kids. You start looking at older kids that are looking at a lot of YouTube, they're looking at a lot of things, and they make them seem like it's a really interactive situation. And it's a pseudo interaction. It's definitely not real. So what happens is frequently they're looking at an external locus of control. They're looking at something outside of themselves to give them a satisfaction, to manage, to allow for interest, to allow for factors in their education. Even on platforms where they're interactive and there's a number of people, it is very, very different than when you are in, let's say, a group and they're in an environment, whether it's a social group, an academic group, a parental group, it's the experience is completely different. So frankly, many times kids are desensitized by watching YouTube or any of these platforms. So they don't, as I said, have good internal locus of control. They're relying on something external to themselves to appease them, to soothe them, to make them comfort, how to manage their time and so forth. The other thing is the media's language can be very problematic because language is a factor that goes to those nerves. So it's like many times they go on a YouTube environment and there are spin-offs about many of the books that you will read from major authors. Only thing is somebody has taken, and they keep the characters the same. They may keep the characters very much the same, looking the same, but what they do is they create a whole new dialogue, a whole new storyline. And sometimes what they do with that storyline can be very serious in terms of how it can influence the developing mind. And then you get into those social relationships, which can be stunted or depressed. And what ultimately happens, because parents are trying to understand and trying to be responsible, parents get overwhelmed. Because it's like, where is this coming from? This isn't what's said in the home. This isn't, I'm not seeing this necessarily with your friends. Well, it's the influencing of watching YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, you touched on a lot of different points, and from a social language standpoint, being so invested in your screen and so invested in YouTube from a very young age can really impact early childhood development and early social language development. Kids are not gaining the appropriate social skills such as reading facial expressions, reading body language, reading tone of voice in other people and in themselves. So like Madeline said, they're having more difficulty recognizing and reflecting on their own actions and also reflecting on other people's actions, which then, it later makes it more difficult to acquire those social skills that should be imprinted so early in childhood. If they're not imprinted early in childhood, then acquiring those skills later on is much more difficult, and it likely doesn't happen in the most natural way that it can. And then, their inability to read social cues in themselves and in other people impacts their social relationships. So those who are able to read facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, and others more appropriately are, experience much more positive social relationships. And those that have an inability or stunted ability to read those cues in other people, they have more negative social relationships, or just, the social relationship might not exist as often. So,
and I just want to add something here. It's also very important to realize we know some individuals, many have pragmatic skills. They're deficits. They are challenged. The belief that just viewing even pragmatic instruction on a screen is going to automatically transfer into the context of real life is a false assumption. And that happens frequently. I mean, it happens in all kinds of environments. And if you're thinking about movies and aspects, many times what kids do is they'll take a phrase or they'll take something and they latch onto it, but they don't know of the proper social situation to communicate that phrase or when or how to act. So they require what I would call the human connection, more so now than ever. I think so.
Absolutely. Yeah. The next platform that I'd like to talk about is TikTok. TikTok has quite a hold on me, and I'm sure many other people. It's a platform similar to YouTube, I'd say, in the fact that you are consuming the same type of media. So videos, there's visuals, there's sounds at the same time, but the clips are shorter. So with TikTok, you usually have a 15-second clip, a minute-long clip, or now they have a feature where you can do a 3-minute long clip, but that's still not really being utilized as much as the shorter variations of that. So with these short videos that kids, adults, everyone really who have gone on TikTok, they get addicted to scrolling through these short videos, and a lot of times you can find yourself in a sort of time suck where you don't even realize that you've just been scrolling for an hour. So can you both tell us or touch on the implications of a platform like TikTok on attention span and addiction?
Okay. TikTok is famous for what we call intermittent reinforcement. I mean, it has everything in it, from the time span and to the rate of changes, that you are basically in a visual auditory casino and you're pulling that slot machine. Only thing, what's the slot machine is how rapidly the scenes change. And it requires that repetitive behavior. It does something to the brain, because the brain is, we have molecules of emotions. We're driven by emotions. So a lot of it on TikTok is showing, doing funny things or acting certain ways or making comments. And what happens is it feeds an emotional state. And that emotional state, we become addicted to. You get high off of it. And so what it's an external factor evoking an internal state that once you have that state, you want to keep on going back to it. And frankly, I believe that the developers of these programs, they have this all figured out. It's basically going back to Skinnerian methodologies whereby, okay, we're going to get you hooked in this, and we've got it all figured out timing wise. I mean, it's not an accident that they have the timing that they have on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Going off of just what you said, TikTok is created to feed it into our issues with instant versus delayed gratification. So companies like TikTok, they create these personalized algorithms that follow all of the users' interactions, whether it's likes, shares, comments, posts, accounts that you follow. They create this special feed that you look at every day, and it's all catered to what you like or what's going to interest you the most or get the biggest reaction out of you. And so it feeds into that instant gratification, which is the idea of getting something without a delay. And users of TikTok get that instant gratification and bursts of serotonin when they scroll through, funny, interesting, heartwarming videos, and they want to keep scrolling to find that burst of serotonin or that instant gratification again and again, without realizing how much time has passed while they were sitting on the app.
I made reference, which is here, about positive emotions, but if you have a child or an individual who's angry, and they are not successful at communicating their anger in a constructive way, they watch some, because they're not all positive on TikTok. All right, I mean, that's, I don't wanna have people believe, that TikTok, everything is positive, because it's not. So when you have those instant bursts of anger, it reinforces that, first of all, it's appropriate. Some ways that they're demonstrating that anger is really violent, and it's really unhealthy, and it perpetuates a way of thinking that reinforces the anger rather than being able to resolve it in a constructive manner. So it's like, you're on an anger treadmill, and that, is definitely not healthy at all. But it gratifies them for that moment. It releases that feeling, okay? But put them in a social situation where they're interacting with human beings, it could be very destructive.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting that you bring that up, because as Sierra said, the algorithm is very tailored, especially on TikTok and other platforms as well. But I feel like on TikTok, it is incredibly tailored to that individual user. So much so that when you're scrolling, you could, watch one video and then you're on to the next video, and it's, the same type of video. So it's like that instant algorithm that's reading you. So you see these people who find their quote unquote community on TikTok, and they might not have very positive feelings, or so on and so forth, but then the algorithm feeds them into this new community that condones their feelings, or condones their anger, their the way that they convey these feelings. So that's also really interesting to think about, for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. It almost creates a false sense of community.
Yeah.
And false sense of connection with other people.
Yeah.
But you're only seeing a snippet of who they really are.
Right.
And you don't know who these people are behind their screens and what they're posting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so in contrast, TikTok gives you that instant gratification, and delayed gratification skills are so important to build, as young children grow into young teens and then adults. And delayed gratification, it's the act of resisting an impulse to take an immediately available reward in the hope of obtaining a more valued reward in the future. So the ability to delay gratification is essential to self-regulation and self-control. And it's just taking the more difficult path to get a more valuable reward, instead of taking the short and easy path to get a reward that lasts for a few minutes or even seconds. So.
I mean, every parent has experienced this.
Yeah.
And we all have, oh, well, no, I don't think I should have that, this, dessert, giving dessert to a kid before you want them to have their protein and so forth, because you're worried, it's just not always healthy. I mean, we know sometimes you have dessert before dinner, but my point is, you see this in the stores a lot. Kids will want something, or impulse buying and so forth. That issue of delayed gratification is paramount to social emotional development. And we're weak in that right now as a society. If we look at what has occurred, we're very weak in that. But we're seeing where it's being reinforced consistently to not have delayed gratification. And so it's important to keep these things in mind, because as mentioned earlier, awareness is really a key factor with all of this, to be aware of what is happening when your child yourself are viewing these kinds of mediums.
Absolutely, yeah. The next platform that I'd like to discuss is Twitter. Twitter is on the downfall, as I mentioned before, for usage among teens, which is really great, because when I was in high school, when I was younger, I remember Twitter just being the playground for so much drama, so much bullying. I mean, it's a platform where you post tweets. So it's a small message. It does have a character limit, but it could be anywhere from a funny joke you heard to what you're feeling to something that just happened at school. It's, real-time updates of kids and people alike. So it's nice that it's on the downfall, because it has so many risks to it. Twitter is a platform that has less regulation by its shareholders, or, in contrast to an app like Instagram, where they're more regulating the content that's being posted. Twitter, you're not going to get that. You can go in and you can change your settings to kind of censor certain content out of your feed, but Twitter's not going to do that for you. And it's not going to fact check. It's not going to do any of these things. So furthermore, with Twitter, the only way you can remove something from someone's timeline is by the user who posting it, when they have to go in and delete it. So if Sierra says something bad about me on her Twitter, I can't go in and delete that tweet. Sierra's the only one that can delete that tweet. So it's this idea that we're putting these instant thoughts into a public space for everyone to see, everyone to know about, and it's permanent. It really is permanent. So, Madeline, with that being said, and considering your expertise in the field, what is the impact that you've seen from cyberbullying over the years of social media growth?
Oh, that's a sad subject right now, and it's sad because of the in the last 6-7 years, maybe 10, and definitely the last 6 or 7 years, we have seen a exponential growth in suicide, self-harm, and personal abuse, verbal bullying, as well as physical and so forth. There was a TV drama series that came out. It was called 13 Reasons Why. And I personally have never been able to get myself to look at the series, nor read the book, which came out earlier. But the series started in March of 2017, and it ended in June of 2020. All right. And that series, based upon that, we saw a high rise of children, younger children, things we have never seen before in elementary school. We're talking about 4th grade, 3rd grade, commenting about wanting to kill themselves, wanting to hurt themselves. And the feeling of when there was a problem presented, certain feelings, they didn't know what to do with it. So when we talk about something like Twitter, it has definitely over the years recently had a very serious complications to our society and to our youth. And I don't believe it's not just in the United States. It must be understood. This has been worldwide. I mean, you can, communicate with individuals who are in the mental health fields in other countries, and they will tell you the same. All right. We have seen, since it's documented, this is documented information, that since 2016, there has been a significant, substantial rise in the suicide ideation, the self-harm, not only in cutting, but we're also talking about eating disorders. We're talking about the whole issue of the psychological factors that are associated with all of this, and boys and girls. So it's not in just one gender. We're seeing it across the board, okay? And the internet, they know now, social media, all right, is an influencer in this area, all right? And it can't be stressed enough that we all have to be diligent. We can no longer take an individual's passing comment as being incidental. We have to really do some checking and making sure, okay, my gosh, okay, you made a comment. Where is this coming from? How long have you felt this way? I mean, do you have a plan? Are you've thought about ways? What is happening? And, the issue comes down to is that there is very graphic content. The words are actually very emotional words that impact an individual words to the nerves, and it sets up an ideation, especially over those in those children that are already insecure. You know, it's not easy. It's not easy. We all had challenges as in growing up. The complications right now in dealing with media has exacerbated that tremendously. And what happens is there's been increase in the follow through. It's not just incidental comments anymore. The acting on of the communication is definitely higher. The power, this is the issue, as you alluded to, or stated, and then allude to. The power is in the person who's doing the bullying, who's doing the writing, and frequently they get groups. It's not just frequently just one individual, they get a whole group, which then compounds the issue for the individual who's on the receiving end. It becomes a trauma. It becomes something that does then change their neurophysiology. I mean, because that's what trauma does. You know, it gets into the hippocampus, it gets in the amygdala, it forms a loop, and it keeps on digging into the individual, all right? Even individuals who have really great cognitive skills. I mean, you know, in many areas, they have a whole lot going for them. They're doing well. They seem like things are going great. You will hear them, then their communication becomes jumbled. They get confused. They want to be isolated. They lose their appetite. Something happens that is not easily understood frequently, all right? And confusion becomes part of it, and then they don't want to say anything because the shame comes in. It's embarrassing. They can't understand. I can figure this out myself. It's a complicated matter. We are finally, you know, becoming much more aware in the last, you know, few years in terms of how to manage it. COVID did not help matters. We all know that, and that's a whole nother complication in relation to understanding how it impacts the individual. You know, I can't stress it enough that this is overwhelming for parents. It's scary. It's all those things. It's important that you stay aware, and you stay, as you are aware, you bring love into the matter, not shame, not negativity. And you communicate your vulnerability, you seek help, because this media has definitely statistically and has impacted our social development of our youth. Absolutely. And it's adults also, though, they get caught up in it, which is, so it's not just youth. I should say it's adults get caught up in it also.
And with these different platforms, you know, with cyberbullying, it's nonstop. So when you're bullied at school, when you're bullied in person, you leave the school, your school day is over, and you walk away from that. And so, yeah, these thoughts may be in your head, these memories of what other people said about you may be in your head, but you're walking away from that bully. Cyberbullying is so much different because it's this nonstop, this constant. You check your Twitter and you see that they're still talking about you. They're still saying these horrible things about you. There's just kind of no way to get away from it. And I think that really affects kids as well.
Yeah. And it just provides a shield for whoever is doing the bullying.
Right.
You know, they can just hide behind the screen and they'll never confront you at school in person, face to face, but they'll confront you as much as they want online.
Right. Yeah. All right. So let's tackle the last two beasts, Instagram and Snapchat. So these platforms, they're used for picture sharing, and they differ in some key ways. So on Instagram, you have your feed, or you have your specific individual page where you post photos and personalized photos that the key thing to keep in mind about this is those photos can be edited in any way, shape, or form, from filters to making your face look skinnier, your teeth look whiter, you know, getting your good angles. So you name it, and people have done it on Instagram. For Snapchat, you have something similar in terms of sharing photos or sharing videos, but this is a little bit more one-on-one. So you are sending snaps to your friends, to your peers, to anyone who's added you on Snapchat. And a lot of people, especially teens and young adults, they believe that Snapchat is a little bit more safer because it's temporary, so to speak. So you send a snap, your friend looks at the snap, and then it's gone. It disappears within a few seconds, and you can't get that picture back or that video back. So a lot of the times this platform will be used among teens for things like explicit photo sharing. Even, you know, I would go so far as to say it could be pornographic in a sense, sharing photos of yourself to a boyfriend or to a girlfriend, and you have this false sense of security thinking that this Snapchat is going to go away in just a few seconds. But you know, you can do things like screenshot, and you can screen grab now on an iPhone. So with screen grabbing, you don't even get the notification that that has happened. So if I screen grab while I'm opening your Snapchat, I can now have that recording of whatever you just sent me in my phone, and you have no idea. Whereas screenshotting in the Snapchat app, you do get the notification. So there's some scary ways where you know, your content can be shared, and you have this false sense of security thinking it's not. Additionally, Instagram, you now see the normalization of different people posting explicit content that would be considered explicit 20 years ago, and now it's so normalized. You see women, you know, with angles where they show their boobs or in bikinis or, you know, lingerie, and this is, like I said, content that 20 years ago you would never want anyone other than an intimate partner to see, but now we're normalizing it and we're putting it on the feed for everyone to know. So with that being said, will you both elaborate on how the usage of these platforms can affect social sexual development and awareness?
Okay. One of the issues that I want to pick up on, Carly, that's really important, the level of desensitization. As a society, we have become desensitized to many, many things. Part of the issue right now is the level of desensitization in terms of our youth, with awareness of their own, what I would call body, mind, and in relation to others. All right. So sometimes that can be helpful, and other times it can be absolutely dangerous, because their awareness becomes very depressed, or they become what I would call a little bit disassociated from their own self, their own body, their own sense of who they are and what is happening. And when you start talking about the photos and so forth, you end up, the healthy social sexual development is frequently interrupted, because they don't have a real sense of how to establish what you call a relationship. And on these sites, they become frequently victimized, and there's a traumatization with that victimization. Frequently they're unaware of it being a trauma. It's not registered because they don't have the cognitive understanding of what the behaviors mean at the moment. And many of these individuals are very insecure. And not just females. We focus so much on females. Males also end up being traumatized, victimized, because the reality is that there are predators, and they are very intelligent, and they're very skilled at what they are aware of and what they're doing and what they want. So frequently the boundaries of what is safe, what is unsafe, what is healthy, what is unhealthy becomes extremely convoluted and confused in our young adults. And I'm talking about middle school kids. I'm talking about upper elementary, 6th graders. I am not just talking about kids who are in high school right now. We have seen this, there's been a trickle down effect. And the understanding about what is happening is frequently not there because parents are one, not aware all the time, or it's challenging to communicate to a child about all of this social sexual development. And you know, how we are looking at what beauty is. How do we look at, you know, the different developmental stages and the different developmental rates, and how do we provide a context for our children in understanding what is happening? How do they feel comfortable with breast development? How do these young boys feel comfortable with all of a sudden experiencing erections, and are they talking about it, and is it really being communicated about? And sometimes it's not, because parents don't even know what to do. We're not always helping parents to be educated, you know, so they become victims. And frequently what happens is they tumble into it. They don't, it's not where they mean to go. It's not where they intended to go. It's just they tumble into it. Oh, I'm curious. I'm a little bit precocious. I heard this word, okay? You know, you've seen a rise in the whole area of victimization, of areas of dealing with and processing pornography, because it's important to know that your predators are skilled communicators. They are very psychologically astute, and nothing is an accident that's happening on any of these platforms. These algorithms are really thought out, this whole process. Your predators know about that, okay? And they understand the language of how to take someone who is vulnerable or who isn't really sure, and they can be very, very skilled at manipulating, all right? They begin to demystify, they begin to normalize behaviors that in a proper developmental context isn't normal and is not appropriate, and so forth. So that they make that language feel good. They make everything feel good. And one of the issues is all of these kids want to feel good. They want to feel accepted. They want to feel beautiful. They want to know they're okay. And they tumble into it. And what they do, they use words that move beyond what we frequently would call a sense of shame, a sense of guilt, a sense of uncomfortableness. And that's manipulation. And they're highly, highly skilled at it. And then the child becomes over-sexualized. And that over-sexualization becomes normalized. And then you run into, you know, challenges with what we would call appropriate social sexual development. And it's very confusing. They become frequently preoccupied about their body, because that is where their self-worth is. They become disconnected with their body-mind, all right? We know that happens. We know that frequently then depression comes in, all right? And it requires then a reconstruction of their own self-worth, their own understanding of what the implications are. And it's a rebuilding, and it can be done. It's not that it can't be, but we have to be aware of what the complications are and the vulnerabilities are with these particular types of platforms. The issue of helping parents to understand that then parents get traumatized. parents go, oh my gosh, how did I let this happen? And it's not, it's challenging because one, kids are smarter frequently than parents are about these different platforms. And the designers of these platforms are very, very talented. And whether I like it or not, I believe, I don't have any proof, but there's a network out there of people that are comfortable with preying on youth and vulnerable young males and females. And the issue is how to help the child understand, and the parents, the child is victimized. All right, and how to begin to break and change that level of thinking and the stunted emotional development. It's how to take a situation that was an absolute emotional breakdown and make it into something that is not shamed. It is not forming guilt. It is learning how to bring that and digest that traumatic experience so that the individual can go on and lead a very healthy, fulfilling life. That is possible. All right, it can be done. All right, as long as the situation is filled with compassion, is filled with love, is filled with understanding, and that communication is open, no matter how painful it is for the parents or for the child, but that the communication is kept open and clear.
And that ties into, parents' reactions to finding out that something has happened online that was inappropriate or sexual in nature. And, the way that parents initially react is so crucial to that communication that is going to happen right there and then further down the line, whether your child is going to be comfortable with coming to you. Yes, being aware of parents being aware of their reactions and ensuring that it does come from a place of compassion and love, not shame.
We're not tonight getting into what parents should do. We're not getting into the proper authorities to call and so forth. What we're saying, and it's just really tonight to open up into awareness that these platforms, and Instagram is a very it's a platform that has to be watched closely. I think we cannot just say a child has this platform. Parents have to be aware and look at the phones or track the phones or have a connection. And it doesn't matter who your child is. The insidiousness of the situation, sometimes shocks me as to the level at which individuals will go to actually violate innocent individuals who are vulnerable. They're just vulnerable.
Yeah, and I do want to touch on something that Madeline discussed, which was the idea of these predators on the internet. Something that I've experienced in my own teenage years is the fact that predators don't only just come in people that you don't know. It's not just a stranger that's adding you on Instagram or wherever. They could be people that you know as well. They could be older brothers, they could be teachers, they could be these different individuals that are actual people in these young girls or young boys' lives, and these platforms make these younger individuals accessible to those predators. That's really what it comes down to, is accessibility. And this idea that, so and so is messaging me on Instagram. He found my Instagram. He's messaging me. We have to keep it a secret. But it's this idea that just being accessible and these young minds that are being sought after by these predators. That's really what's scary. And just thinking about that and thinking about how you know, just, yeah, going back to accessibility, it's really so scary.
And it's, you know, I'm thinking here, and we're not, I'm not saying don't have them have access. You have to educate. You have to educate and let them know where the vulnerability is. If they start having a stranger trying to contact them and they have no idea, they tell you. They don't open it up and say, oh, this is really interesting. Because that's where the seduction is. That is where the manipulation comes in, because everything starts out so innocently. You know, it's just fun. This is really innocent. The problem is that language that they're using, the ideas they are planting, it's like a sequence. It's systematic, and they're cueing off of, all right, the nonverbal cues, and they're going to be better at nonverbal reading than the child who is being victimized. And that's really what happens. They're much more skilled, and it starts off innocently, and before you know it, the kid is confused and doesn't know, and they're in a situation that is way beyond where they ever thought they would be. That's what the problem comes in. I mean, you know, we know lots of times, you know, even on YouTube, people go to sites and so forth, and before they know it, you've got a pop-up here, you got a pop-up here, you got a pop, and these kids then just think, oh, I'm just gonna have a pop-up. Well, these pop-ups become increasingly more involved in certain words and certain attitudes. So before you know it, they've had a pop-up and the kid's on a pornography site, and they're not even sure how they really got to it, but oh my gosh, what is this? All right. So it's not always done when the child is having intention to do something, which I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, we didn't touch on every single risk, every single thing that could possibly happen from these platforms today. We have things like location tags as well, most notably on Snapchat and Instagram, where, you know, kids will post a story or they'll post a snap and they'll tag their location. And a lot of these teens and these kids, they don't have the awareness to know what the real risk is in doing things like that, posting exactly where you are when you're there. Similarly on Snapchat, where you have the snap maps and you can just click on the map and it shows you exactly where the person is. You know, those are really scary things. As adults, you think about, I don't want anyone to know where I am at any given time, but I know personally as a teenager, it wasn't even a second thought. I just activated it because it was really cool to know where my friends are and for my friends to know where I am. But I'm not thinking about the strangers that could add me on Snapchat. I'm not thinking about, you know, the people that can hack into Snapchat. I'm not thinking about those big ideas that adults have to think about, because I'm just a teenager and it's really cool to know where my friends are and for my friends to know where I'm at. Similarly, we didn't really touch on this, but the idea of going viral is something that is so big on social media right now. And so, you know, these huge personalities that are not necessarily great people, they're doing these sometimes borderline obscene things just to become famous. They're, you know, having their moment, so to speak. And these kids are trying to imitate it. They're trying to imitate these behaviors, whether it be, you know, like a dangerous behavior of jumping off something, or having these, you know, these thoughts and vocalizing these feelings about, you know, women or men, and just trying to imitate these different behaviors so that they could have their moment. Those are other things that, you know, we didn't really have time to touch on today, but they're really important to take into consideration. one word we use today and we oftentimes talk about at Falcone Institute is the idea of discernment, of being able to discern what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, be able to discern what's a good action versus a bad action, or an action that's going to get you into trouble, or an action that's going to get you into a mess that you can't get yourself out of. So I think really the main question that lingers is, how can we teach our kids to have proper discernment with these platforms? I mean, they're not going away.
No, they're not gonna go away.
Yeah.
No.
We're not gonna, you can't pull your kids' social media and say, you're done, you can't have social media until you're 18 years old. It's just not practical, it's not possible. There's things like Finstas, fake Instas, where your kid is under a different name, a different picture, you have no idea, that they have these things. So what can we do? What can parents do to help their kids learn and help really open that line of communication so their kids feel comfortable going to them with these issues that are not easy to talk about? What is your recommendation in terms of that?
The recommendation, oh my gosh. We are all addicted to our phones. We're all addicted to our phones. And I think anyone who says they're not, it's an illusion. All right. Maybe they don't have a phone, but I don't know anybody who doesn't have a phone. The bottom line comes to this. You have to open those doors of communication, even if they're uncomfortable, and they can be. They can be very uncomfortable. You have to, as parents, as educators, therapists, we can no longer skirt issues. We have to use the proper vocabulary. We may have to use slang. We may have to use language we're not comfortable with, because we have to reach our youth, because we have right now a real crisis that is happening in terms of being connected and really understanding what is going on in the mass media and how much it is influencing them. We have to be and help them be their discernment. We can't expect a teenager whose frontal lobes are not developed, their higher order thinking skills, they're barely able to do those critical reasoning skills academically sometimes. And so when you're asking them to discern in a social emotional situation, their ego gets involved. They're competing with their friends. There are groups of kids where it's one-upmanship. And that one-upmanship then begins to cross the line into something that's unsafe, something that's unhealthy. And we have to begin to facilitate for them how really wise and healthy is this. We have to go where that sometimes, even if we're uncomfortable, we have to communicate about what is really happening. What does it look like? Because we can't always be there in the context that they are in. We have to provide some scenarios and some awareness. We have to go back to some of those ways that we're not accustomed to. Instead of giving the kid the iPad.
Yeah.
All right, I can think of what it was. Okay, giving them the iPad. It may be they're going to throw a tantrum because they're not getting their iPad. How do you weather that tantrum? But that tantrum is an indication of their state dependency. Yes. That's what that is. It's an indication. And I mean, this happens with big ones and it can happen with little ones. It's a little scarier when you have a kid who's, 5'10", 6 feet tall, sitting there throwing a tantrum, but it's still the same level of issue. They just had many more years that they've been throwing these tantrums because they haven't figured out how to be able to have some delayed gratification. So you got to communicate. If we don't, we're going to lose. it's important, it's imperative, because these kids are beautiful human beings. I mean, I don't work with bad kids. I don't see bad kids. I see where there are gaps. And hopefully, we've been able to communicate just a little bit, a smidgen, about some of those areas. We can't ignore anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and parents will say, well, I'm not trying to ignore. No, you're not. It's just, it can be very exhausting for parents, very challenging, very frightening. That is the reality. And that is where the parents have to become aware. It's okay as a parent to look and go and say, I am really scared, and I am lost, and I need support, and I need to take a look at how to bridge this, how to manage this, and how to open up areas that are not real comfortable. Because I didn't get this when I was a kid. But most of us were not raised with a computer in our hand that can go anywhere.
Yeah.
Anywhere. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So.
What about you, Sierra? Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, so I mean, going off what Madeline said, open communication and honest communication is one of the most important things you can give to your child. But there are apps, that can track your child's phone, and it can track their texts that are sent, texts that are received, phone calls that are made. It can track their social media activity, the online content that they're viewing. It can even monitor their screen time and also provide a way for safe location sharing. So these apps are, they're called Bark, Custodio, Net Nanny. And it's great to have as many, precautions in place as you can, but it's it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when your child gets past these parental controls. You can put everything in place and think that you have it all checked marks, that you have Snapchat, you have Instagram, all limited, but your child's going to find a way to get past it. And so that's why the communication is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think also, you have these different things in place to kind of check where your child's going, what your child's doing, things like that. But it really does fall back on the communication, because, if I were in that place of, oh, my mom has a tracking device on my phone, she's looking at my Snapchat, all these things, now I become defensive, and I say the phrase, you don't trust me? Do you not trust me? So it really does fall back on communication, right? And making sure they understand, and that you're doing it because you love them. And I just think that's so important, because I mean, I remember being a teenager and putting my mom through the ringer, and just, everything she did, I look back on now and I'm like, wow, she was really just trying to keep me safe. But in the time, I was always the victim, like, oh, she doesn't trust me. She doesn't trust what I'm saying. She doesn't think I'm mature enough. So this thought, trying to balance that.
Yeah.
I think it's great, okay, because I'm the only one that's a parent in this group.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to say is, it's okay for your kid to say, I hate you. It is really okay, mom and dad. Because at that moment, they really do hate you. They hate us. And years later, and my own looked at me and said, yeah, but I'm so glad you did. I'm really glad you said no. Even though I felt like my social life, my personal life was a wash. It's not easy. There are no manuals. There's nothing sometimes to take away parental angst and parental self-doubt and fear and all of that. You know, it's important that you trust, use your intuition, use your love, and stand firm. And you may shed a bunch of tears. It's really okay. Because in the long run, that's what parenting is about. It's about being there in those moments when they do not want us near them. And you have to, because the medium that they are now using on is very, very powerful and has so many implications, much more than I ever was really aware of. And I'm going to do something I don't usually do, but I'm doing something, and I haven't even read the book. I just listened to the podcast. There's a book written by Max Fisher called The Chaos Machine. And this man has spent 5 years looking at the history, understanding the algorithms, understanding the brains behind all of the mediums, I should say, that we are talking about. And the implications in ways that are so vast. And literally, our brains as human beings, our children's brains are significantly different than our brains. And the area that is suffering is emotions, the ability to calibrate, the ability to regulate, the ability to modulate emotions. And it's not just because of COVID. It's because we are absolutely interfacing day in and day out on platforms that are changing us in ways that we're not always fully consciously aware of. And obviously, he can communicate it much better than I have. All right, that it's as I said, Max Fisher, and it's called The Inside Story of How Social Media Rewired Our Minds and Our World. And it's the truth. Kids nowadays are not the same types energetically, style-wise, than the kids I worked with 20 years ago. They don't even come close to it. And we have to stay aware. They're worth it. So, we have what questions? Do you have any questions?
I just had one question just to go off of what we were initially discussing. One thing that comes to mind is, how can parents model the correct behavior when it comes to social media use? Because
Good question.
for me, I was, as I was exiting high school, that's when phones became more prevalent, smartphones. So I had, the slider phone up until maybe senior year when the iPhone became really prevalent. So I wasn't the generation to be scrolling on the phone while I was, I was with mom and dad. Mom and dad and I and my siblings, we would, watch movies together. It would be Sundays were for, movie marathons and things like that. So how can parents model the correct behavior, or what can they do to show their kids what is the correct way to go about this media usage?
Okay, this is so fascinating to me because I do a lot of observing. There's a part of me that does a lot of observing, and what I notice so frequently, kids will be in a carriage, the parents pushing the carriage, and we're talking about kids that are a little bit older, they're just not sleeping, and the parents are on the phone. All right, the parents have got to learn to put away their own phones.
Yes,
you got to learn to put away your own phone. It really is talking the talk and walking the walk, and it is really saying, okay, there are no phones at the dinner table. I don't care who it is, including dad. You can take a half hour and say phone is off limits. A half hour out of your whole day. All right. It is knowing that sometimes driving the kid to and from school, we want to make this phone call, we want to do this or that. You don't do that. All right, using the car as a means to reestablish connection and communication. Yes, creating a family night where you are watching movies together. Sounds really old fashioned, okay? You wanna know what? You gotta have some connection. And now I don't wanna watch this movie, just here, have some popcorn, you're gonna sit, this is what we're going to do, or whatever, however you do it. I do believe that we need to take some of that time, even if it's a half hour, and we restructure, you know. No, you don't put the phone for breakfast. That's not what you're doing. All right. There has to be a repatterning of how to get connected. All right. It's a factor, or sharing. You know, you want to listen to this podcast, okay? Listen to this podcast, all right? And then stop it and discuss it. Don't listen to the whole 45 minutes or whatever it is. Take chunks of it and you discuss it. You may never get through to it, but the point is that you're establishing some means of communication. You go on trips, all right? Everybody wants to plug in their own, you know, headphone. Take some time and get an audiobook. All right, and you're listening to the audiobook while you're driving. I know it sounds like, oh my gosh, but and yes, you're going to go through grief trying to change certain patterns. It's going through grief. It feels like torture, and it may be torture on their neurophysiology for a while, because that is not what they have done. That is not what they've experienced. It's just, it's not there. I mean, okay, but we have to reconnect, because it's imperative right now, and we have all been changed. We have all been changed. I do it all the time. It's like, okay, are you going to talk to me? Or are you going to talk on the phone? What do you know? I mean, there's a reality to this, and it's like, ooh, oh yeah, have you noticed how much? Oh, we're at the dinner table. Why is the phone sitting here? It happens.
It does. Yeah, I saw something recently. It was like this woman was talking about her, you know, just becoming more aware of her phone usage, and she realized that she can ask herself this question: is this a time that I would bring out a book? That I would read a book, you know, and if it is a time that she would read a book, then that is when she can be on her phone scrolling. If it's not a time that is appropriate to be reading a book, such as at a dinner table with your family or while watching a movie, then you put the phone away. So, yeah.
And I'm not saying it's easy.
It's not.
I'm not, but we need to be connected.
Yeah.
It goes for all of us.
Absolutely. I think it's fascinating to think about really the short period of time it's taken for us to become so addicted to the phone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, like I said, I was exiting high school, graduating when the smartphone became a real big thing, and you know, that wasn't that long ago. So it's just fascinating to think how
6, 7 years. It's only been really it's been less than 10 years.
Yeah.
And that is the thing we have to think about.
Yeah.
All right, because the generation of children, I mean, 1 and 2 year olds know how, they may not know. I mean, it was you were telling me.
Yeah.
Tell them. This is fascinating.
I used to work with really little ones, like between 6 months old to 5 or 6 years old. And I worked with this one little girl. She was a year old, and she had no words yet. No signs, nothing. She could not tune into anyone's facial expressions. She was very disconnected socially and emotionally, and she could navigate her parents' phone and get to the camera faster than I could. So she could also use her parents' car keys. She knew buttons, and she knew the motor movements of those buttons easier than she knew how to communicate. So.
Yeah, and we sit there, you know, and I mean, I've been a victim with my nephew saying, oh, it's so cute, you know, he's a baby and he knows how to get rid of notifications on the phone when he's watching YouTube. And it's like, you know, it's cute because they're little, but is it, when you think about it in the long run, what kind of, you know, kid is this gonna be? What kind of teen is this gonna be? What kind of adult is this eventually going to be?
It's doing to their brain. You see,
Yeah.
what we're not paying attention to, and we think is that that's altering the brain.
Mhm.
There are certain nerves that aren't being wired together, okay? And what you practice gets wired together. That's just what happens. And we don't think about it. Then we wonder when they're older, well, how come this isn't connected? Well, it hasn't been practiced being connected, or we're going to practice it now. And it's like, oh, this is really painful. This is really challenging because it hasn't been connected.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's fascinating. I think that's a safe word. I just use the word fascinating. Okay. You know, I don't know. Do we have any questions?
We're gonna go through a couple questions that we received. So the first one is, will you provide resources so I can learn more about how to understand social media and what language to use when talking to my child? I think definitely yes. Sierra brought in a really good video for our team, which is, you know, a little bit scary to watch. So I definitely recommend watching it maybe in parts. But that's something that we think might be useful to share with our parents of, you know, our kids. And
I was also going to say, if people are interested, we can go through and do a talk so that we can take more questions and answers that relate to people's specific needs. You know, I mean, we can do that. And because the question is an absolutely valid, important question. It's just impossible to really add all of it to it, you know, to what to say and how to say it. But we can provide some of that in resources and references, and let us know if you're interested in us, you know, doing a follow-up so that it's more interactive, even though this is kind of a weird place to interact, okay?
All right, this next one's really interesting because we've talked about it this week. Do you have concrete examples of ways that social media is trying to deal with youth development issues in a positive manner and platforms that are healthy for youth development? That kind of reminds me of our conversation about how media usage and technology could be healthy. So can you guys expand on that?
There are plenty of apps that are educational and they're really beneficial for children's learning, and they can, you know, coincide really well with what they're learning at school and just, you know, be that motivating thing that gets them to actually do the academic work and things like that. But it all has to be monitored and, you know, kind of gone through before, filtered through.
I think it also needs to be followed up with communication with the parent or the adult. There are some very, very good sites that really educate parents in terms of how to communicate about social sexual development. That has to, you can't just give a kid a site. You have to be able to sit down and communicate with them, and using appropriate language and being able to answer their questions. And if you don't have an answer, you'll look it up or you'll figure it out. Those sites are definitely available, and they are very helpful in terms of knowing, you know, what to say and how to say and communicate with your child, and how to eventually manage, you know, their uncomfortableness or your uncomfortableness. And that is really important. Yes.
Yeah, and I also think that although there are a lot of dangers for these sites, I think there's a lot of small positivities in using them. I mean, you see things like the body positivity movement where you're normalizing what a real body looks like. And so we, you know, before social media, you have these supermodels, you have these Victoria's Secret angels, you have all these women who are modeling this body that's almost unattainable it is unattainable, you know, and they're in magazines, they're in, you know, commercials, and that's where you're really consuming what these women look like. So now, you know, on social media, they have things like the body positivity movement, where you are seeing what real bodies can look like and how, you know, they're being embraced. So I think there are positivities to the usage as well. Even connections, although it's not, you know, face to face, there are certain ways where you can use these platforms in a positive way. It's not all negative. So that's really something to think about as well. So that, I think, is it for today. You know, I do want to touch on something we do here in the office that you're probably well aware of if you have a child who's one of our clients. We actually take the phones when they enter the front office. I am the phone keeper, Carly the phone keeper here. And we really want to encourage and foster, you know, that interaction and that connection for our clients. So maybe not going to that extreme as a parent. You don't want to all take the phone. It's probably not the most beneficial thing to do, but
I do have some, when you're saying, I do have some real suggestions. I do believe that all electronics need to be removed from the child's home, not home, from the child's bedroom when they're going to sleep. No electronics. The EMFs are really unhealthy, but two, it's too easy. It's too easy to go to places and spaces and have conversations into the wee hours of the morning, and then, you know, it's really hard getting them up, and you all know this. So I do believe that is really important for their own and your own, you know, comfort and safety and so forth. So I know I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No worries. Yeah, so that's all we have today. Do you, either of you lovely ladies, have anything else to add?
I don't think so.
No, but thank you. We will get that information out to you. And if you know, have any additional questions and so forth, please let us know.
Yeah.
Thank you
so much for
Good
joining.
night. Take
Good
care.
night.
Be well. Thank you.